This day and time. What happened today, years ago?
Okay, let's unpack this. You've handed us a stack of sources that really zero in on a single date, June 7th.
Yeah, June 7th. And it's interesting because, on the surface, it might seem like just any other day, right?
Exactly. But the material you've shared suggests something else entirely, that this date, maybe just by coincidence, maybe not, has repeatedly marked these moments of, well, significant change, world-altering shifts across centuries, continents even.
And what's compelling about the material is how it pulls together these seemingly unconnected events. It argues that June 7th kind of acts as this recurring hinge point in history.
Hinge point, I like that.
We're looking at 3 specific moments spanning almost 1,000 years that your sources really frame as major shifts.
Right, so this deep dive, it's all about pulling out the core insights from your sources.
Yeah.
What were these moments? First, way back, 1099, the First Crusade reaching the walls of Jerusalem.
Right.
Then, skipping way ahead to 1769, Daniel Boone, that iconic first glimpse of Kentucky.
Right, the frontier story.
And then finally, landing us in 1929 Rome, the Lateran Treaty going into effect, officially establishing Vatican City.
3 very different scenarios.
Very different. So our mission here is to dig into what your sources say made each of these June 7ths a turning point. Explore the different kinds of shifts they represent: conflict, exploration, diplomacy.
And see if looking at them together through the lens of this specific date tells us anything more about how history unfolds, how these junctures happen.
So get ready. June 7th, turns out it might be more than just another square on the calendar. The material suggests it's a date marked by, conflict, discovery, negotiation, each leaving a lasting mark.
Where should we start? Chronologically makes sense, I suppose.
Let's do it. Almost a millennium ago, the Holy Land.
Okay, 1099. So the First Crusade. It's been going on for a while, and it's nearing its primary objective.
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem, exactly. And this European army, they've endured this incredibly arduous journey, thousands of miles. Their sights are absolutely set on this city, which is, deeply sacred to 3 major religions.
And your sources pinpoint June 7th of that year as the day. The moment the army finally actually laid eyes on the city for the first time.
After all that travel, imagine.
Right. They describe this powerful emotional reaction. The sources note many soldiers reportedly just wept when they saw it, the culmination of this long, incredibly difficult trek.
But the material you provided is quite careful not to just linger on that emotional high.
No, it pivots quickly.
It pivots almost immediately to the harsh reality that set in right away. Seeing Jerusalem was one thing.
Taking it was another.
Taking it was a completely different, brutal challenge. The sources detail these grueling siege conditions that followed: a desperate lack of water, food running out, the intense heat, disease spreading like wildfire through the camp.
So that initial powerful moment, it gave way pretty fast to a really brutal, drawn-out struggle.
After nearly a month of siege, marked by really fierce, bloody battles, the city was eventually captured.
And the sources, they're very clear about the consequences, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. Very explicit. While, yes, it achieved the Crusaders' immediate military goal, it left behind what the sources call hard-to-heal wounds.
Hard-to-heal wounds, that's strong phrasing.
It is. And it wasn't just abstract conflict. We're talking about massacres, intensified religious strife that would echo for centuries, and the creation of this precarious Crusader kingdom right there in the heart of it all, existing under constant tension.
So this specific June 7th in 1099, it's not just about arrival. Your sources frame it as the precise start of the final violent push for the city.
Exactly, the beginning of the endgame for that stage of the Crusade.
It's a turning point driven by, intense religious belief, military force. And as the material really underscores, its impact went way beyond just that year. It kicked off a whole new, incredibly volatile era in the region.
Yeah, it's a stark example of how a single date can mark that pivot point from a long-sought goal, that emotional peak, to the immediate, costly, and incredibly complex reality of achieving it, with consequences that lasted for generations.
Fascinating. And quite heavy. Okay, let's take a leap. Centuries forward, across the Atlantic, we're heading now to 18th century America.
Right. A very different scene. This is a time defined by that growing European desire, that ambition to push westward into territories that seemed vast, largely unknown, at least to them.
And the material brings Daniel Boone into focus here. He's presented as this figure almost synonymous with, frontier courage, survival skills.
The quintessential pioneer in that narrative.
Yeah. He sets out to explore lands that, from the perspective of the white settlers, were essentially untouched wilderness. Wild, mysterious.
And the sources, again, they pinpoint June 7th, this time 1769. That's the specific moment they highlight.
What happened on that day?
They describe Boone standing on a high point, Pilot Knob, apparently, and getting his very first really comprehensive view of the Kentucky Valley spread out below him. Fertile land stretching out.
And it's portrayed as, what, an iconic moment.
An iconic moment, yeah. A symbolic opening. The sources depict this single glimpse as basically opening the floodgates, paving the way for the thousands upon thousands of settlers who would soon follow him into that region.
Painting this picture of a kind of promised land, maybe?
Yeah.
Right for the taking?
Exactly. That's the narrative presented. But, and this is really crucial, according to your sources, they immediately provide the vital counterpoint.
Which is?
This was an empty land. This territory was the long-established ancestral home of numerous Native American tribes.
Right. That's critical context.
Absolutely. And the material is quite unflinching about it. It states very clearly that the arrival and presence of Europeans in this so-called promised land directly led to decades of intense conflict, displacement, violence against the native populations.
So the sources explicitly connect that June 7th discovery to the conflict that followed.
Yes. They explicitly call the impact on native tribes a side of history we cannot forget. They acknowledge the devastating consequences of this expansionist turning point.
Okay, so this June 7th in 1769, it's presented as a turning point rooted in exploration, territorial ambition. Yes, a moment of perceived discovery for one group. But your sources make sure we understand that for the people already living there, it marked the beginning of something entirely different. Profound disruption, loss, and struggle. It triggered a wave of settlement that fundamentally changed the land and led to decades of conflict.
It really throws into relief how a single historical marker, a single date, can hold such vastly different meanings, and often tragic meanings, depending on whose perspective you're looking from. How exploration for one group meant dispossession and violence for another.
Yeah, it is striking how the sources try to capture that dual reality. Okay, let's make our final jump. Different kind of turning point again. Modern Europe this time, Rome, 1929. Diplomacy takes center stage.
Right. And the backdrop here is this long-running, simmering conflict, decades old, between the Catholic Church and the newly unified Italian state.
This really heated up after the Kingdom of Italy captured Rome back in 1870, didn't it? That effectively ended the Pope's direct political rule over the Papal States.
Exactly. And your sources explain that after 1870, the Pope at the time declared himself a, quote, prisoner in the Vatican, refused to leave, refused to recognize the legitimacy of the Italian state.
Created this really awkward, tense situation right in the heart of Italy. This Roman question, as it was known.
A political and religious standoff that lasted for, nearly 60 years. It was a major unresolved issue.
Until 1929.
According to the material, yeah. The issue wasn't settled until then, after what your sources describe as pretty tense negotiations. These talks finally resulted in the signing of the Lateran Treaty earlier that year.
Okay, so the treaty was signed earlier. But the key June 7th moment here, the sources emphasize, is the date that treaty officially took effect.
Precisely. The day it became law, solidifying the whole agreement.
And what did that mean practically?
On that specific date, June 7th, 1929, Vatican City State was legally born, recognized as a sovereign, independent nation. The sources know, its unique status geographically tiny, the world's smallest independent state.
But with enormous global influence.
Immense global, spiritual, and diplomatic influence, absolutely.
And this act, taking effect on June 7th, is presented as the definitive end to that whole saga.
Yes, the sources explicitly state it marked the formal end of the Roman question, finally settling that dispute that had dragged on for nearly 6 decades between the Vatican and Italy, a major resolution.
So this June 7th then is a turning point forged through negotiation, political compromise.
Yeah.
It fundamentally changed the map of Rome, the legal status of the Vatican.
Resolved a massive historical standoff and created a new sovereign entity, all through diplomatic means. Quite different from the other 2 examples.
Very different. Okay, so let's recap. We've looked at these 3 distinct June 7ths highlighted in your sources. Crusaders arriving at Jerusalem, 1099. Daniel Boone's view of Kentucky, 1769. And the Lateran Treaty taking effect, 1929.
And the argument woven through your material is that despite these hugely different contexts, you've got intense warfare, frontier expansion, and its human cost, and complex political negotiation.
All 3, on this specific date, June 7th, represent moments where the course of events took a really significant turn. Maybe unexpected, but definitely impactful.
Yeah, major shifts. A turning point defined by war and faith, one defined by exploration and displacement, and one by political resolution and diplomacy.
And the bigger theme your sources seem to suggest is that maybe looking at these disparate events, linked only by the calendar date, tells us something about, well, how history works.
Right. It's not always this smooth, predictable line. Sometimes these profound shifts, these turning points, they just align in surprising ways, across time, across cultures.
So we've taken this deep dive into the material you brought us, uncovering how this one date, June 7th, has served as this kind of pivot point across centuries and continents, from, ancient Jerusalem to the valleys of Kentucky and the heart of modern Rome.
Well, thank you for sharing these sources. They really do offer a unique lens, don't they? A way to see how conflict, discovery, negotiation, how all these powerful forces can converge on a single date and mark these moments of, well, significant transformation.
It really does make you pause, makes you consider. I mean, these events show that major shifts, whether they're born from violent clashes or from exploration and discovery or from careful, painstaking negotiation, they can happen on any given day. So what does it truly say about the unpredictable nature of change, and maybe how we record and understand history? That such incredibly diverse major shifts, as your sources call them, can end up linked by what seems like a totally arbitrary calendar date like June 7th.
That's definitely something worth mulling over. How coincidence and consequence sometimes walk hand in hand through history.
Indeed, something for you, the listener, to think about too.
Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more history daily.